Have you ever done something, like completely, 100% selfless?
I mean, we all like to think we have, right?
Right. Think about it for a second. Maybe you helped a friend move out of their fourth floor walk-up on a perfectly good Saturday?
Oh, yeah, the ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly. Or maybe you volunteered your time somewhere or dropped a generous donation into a charity box. It feels good. It feels pure.
But what if it's not?
Yeah, that's the thing. A 17th century French nobleman, a guy who actually took a bullet to the face for his political faction, realized something kind of terrifying.
Which is that, past that warm, fuzzy feeling, if you dig just a little bit deeper, you probably had a hidden, entirely selfish motive.
So today we are doing a deep dive into the famously piercing Maxims and Moral Reflections Upon Man by François, Duke of La Rochefoucauld.
Along with some of his biographical excerpts, just to, unmask the real reasons we do the things we do.
And it is a profoundly uncomfortable text.
Yeah.
Because we naturally prefer to categorize our actions neatly, placing a heavy premium on this idea of pure altruism.
Oh, absolutely. Looking at our own behavior and concluding, I did that purely because I'm a good person, is a really necessary psychological comfort.
But La Rochefoucauld just strips that comfort away completely.
No, he does. He forces us to examine the foundations of things like friendship, generosity, and justice, and basically asks us to consider the reality that they might just be self-interest in a really clever disguise.
So to understand how someone arrives at such a, seemingly cynical view of human nature, we can't just look at his philosophy in a vacuum.
No, definitely not. We have to look at the glittering, highly deceptive, and honestly physically dangerous world he actually lived in.
Right, so François, born in 1613, was a distinguished nobleman during the reign of Louis XIV in France.
And he wasn't sitting in a quiet pastoral library complaining about humanity. I mean, he was heavily involved in the civil wars of the Fronde.
Which is so wild. I mean, imagine being at the center of the ultimate high school drama, but with kings, armies, and lethal betrayals.
That's a great way to put it. He was fundamentally a man of action before he was a writer.
Right.
He distinguished himself at court, but his political alignments, particularly his intense relationship with the celebrated Duchess of Longueville, pulled him into the absolute chaos of those civil wars.
And the Fronde wasn't some clean, ideologically pure revolution.
Yeah.
It was this messy, aristocratic power grab.
Completely. Nobles were constantly shifting alliances, fighting the king one day and groveling for a royal pension the next.
It was essentially a lethal game of musical chairs, like yesterday's mortal enemy is tomorrow's dinner companion.
Exactly. And at the Battle of Saint-Antoine in Paris, the stakes of that game finally caught up to him.
Because he wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He literally took a musket ball to the face.
Yeah, he was shot in the head. It was a devastating wound that temporarily blinded him and effectively ended his military career.
Wow. But that violence and political treachery directly fueled his psychological insights, right?
Without a doubt. He experienced firsthand the massive gap between the noble ideals people preach and the brutal, self-serving actions they actually take when their power is threatened.
Right, because when your life and your wealth depend entirely on the whims of powerful people and shifting court alliances, you learn to read between the lines very quickly.
You learn to spot the lie. So after his severe injury, when the Fronde was finally defeated and he reconciled with the royal court, he abandoned the physical battlefield for the drawing room.
And his house in Paris became this ultimate gathering place for the intellectual and literary elite of the time.
Right. Sharp minds like Madame de Sévigné and Madame de Lafayette were regulars there.
But he couldn't fight with a sword anymore. Having seen so much betrayal and, raw ego driving the affairs of state, he needed a new weapon.
One that was just as piercing, but entirely verbal.
Exactly. He needed a way to cut through the elaborate, polite fictions of 17th century high society. And that physical limitation led directly to his chosen literary form, the Maxim.
Yeah, in the forced leisure of his later life, he began to craft these incredibly dense, short observations. Based on our sources, a maxim is essentially an epigrammatic sentence that completely strips away all contextual fluff.
It's just the absolute core of an observation on human nature, distilled into a single, highly polished thought.
And he was obsessive about this format. I mean, he would share drafts with his inner circle, absorb their feedback, and sometimes rewrite a single maxim up to 30 times before he finally published the first official collection in 1665.
30 drafts for a single sentence.
Yeah.
That really shows how precise he wanted the psychological cut to be.
It really does. And the sources actually mention that he was drawn to this microscopic form for a very specific reason, referencing the English philosopher Francis Bacon.
Oh, right. What was Bacon's theory on that again?
Well, the text points to Bacon's theory that writing in aphorisms or maxims is the ultimate test of whether a writer is superficial or solid.
Because you can't hide behind fluff.
Exactly. Bacon argued that when you write a traditional essay, you can hide a lack of original thought behind discourse of illustration and descriptions of practice.
You can ramble, use pretty anecdotes, and fill pages with padding.
Right, but in a maxim, all of that architecture is removed. There's nothing left to fill the space except a solid quantity of raw observation.
So if you don't have a genuinely profound point to make, a short, naked sentence will just immediately expose you as ridiculous.
Precisely. It's a high-wire act for a writer.
But let me push back on this format for a second with a specific question. Doesn't boiling human complexity down to a single witty one-liner inevitably distort the truth, just to sound clever?
That's a really valid criticism.
Because if a writer is trying to be as punchy as possible, they're going to sacrifice nuance. You could take any complex psychological trait, strip away the context, and make it sound malicious if you only have 12 words to do it.
Well, you're not wrong, and the source text actually concedes that exact flaw. Yeah, it acknowledges that the chief, perhaps the only serious defect incidental to this mode of composition, is the constantly recurring temptation to sacrifice strict truth to the point of the maxim.
Ah, so to make the turn of expression smarter, truth is sometimes laid down in such general, unqualified terms that sober reason might object.
Exactly. He is occasionally overstating the case for dramatic impact.
So even as defenders admit, he's sometimes prioritizing the mic drop over strict philosophical nuance.
They do, but they also argue the immense benefit of the form far outweighs that flaw.
How so?
Because the necessarily epigrammatic turn constantly arrests your attention. It's so sharp and so sudden that it bypasses your cognitive defenses.
Oh, I see. When you read a long philosophical treatise, your brain has time to formulate counter-arguments while you read.
Right, but a maxim doesn't give you that time. It forces immediate self-reflection because the truth of it stings you before your ego can put up a shield.
It's like a philosophical paper cut. You don't even see the blade coming until you're already bleeding.
That's a perfect analogy.
So now that we understand how he delivered his ideas, we can examine the explosive core idea itself, the great unmasking of virtue.
And the foundational motto of his book really sets the stage for this. He writes, "Our virtues are generally vices in disguise."
Which is such a heavy thesis.
Yeah.
He's basically arguing that self-love, or amor propre, is the moving spring of all human actions.
Yes, it's the invisible psychological gravity behind everything we do. In Maxim number 1, he provides this vivid metaphor for how this actually functions.
The D's on flowers one, right?
Exactly. He says self-love never reposes out of itself. It only settles on strange objects the way bees settle on flowers, just to extract what is useful to it.
Let's unpack that mechanism, because it isn't just a claim that we're mean or selfish.
No, it's deeper than that.
He's saying self-love is an active biological necessity for our emotional survival. We attach ourselves to external things, charities, political causes, even other people.
Not because we inherently value the flower, but because we need to extract the nectar of utility, validation, or status to feed our own ego.
It's like finding out the engine of a luxury car is actually just a bunch of hamsters on a wheel. We think we're driven by high ideals, but it's just basic self-preservation.
And he also compares the nature of self-love to the sea. He notes that the sea finds in the ebb and flow of its waves a faithful representation of the turbulent succession of human thoughts.
So even when you think you've conquered your ego, even when you think self-love is defeated by an act of profound humility, it's just retreating like the tide.
Right, only to reestablish itself in another place on the shore.
Think of the tide coming in. You build a beautiful, intricate sandcastle of what you call generosity or justice. You stand back and admire how permanent and moral it looks.
But the underlying tide of self-interest just washes it away, absorbs the sand, and reforms it into something else that serves you better in the next moment.
He really systematically opens the hood on every noble trait to prove it, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. He argues that what we call generosity is often just a calculated means of gaining a good opinion from others.
And what about justice? That's supposed to be blind and completely objective.
Well, when he examines justice in Maxim 368, he strips away the majesty of the law entirely. He states that the love of justice in most men is nothing but the fear of suffering from the oppression of others.
Meaning, we aren't fair because we have a deep moral devotion to fairness.
No, we agree to be fair as a mutual non-aggression pact.
We're just terrified that someone bigger and stronger is going to be unfair to us?
Exactly. It's rooted in fear, not virtue.
Okay, hold on. I have to reject this absolute framing for a moment. Is he saying true virtue doesn't exist at all?
It's a fair question.
Because what about genuine sacrifice? Like, when I spend my Saturday visiting my best friend in the hospital, sitting in an uncomfortable chair for 6 hours while they sleep, I am not extracting value from them. I'm not gaining status.
You sure about that?
I mean, how does his theory of self-love account for something that painful and seemingly selfless?
Well, La Rochefoucauld would likely ask you to look at the internal emotional utility you're extracting from that hospital visit.
Emotional utility.
Yeah, are you going because you want to avoid the intense guilt you'd feel if you stayed home? Are you going because being the kind of person who visits friends in the hospital is core to your own self-image and vanity?
Wow.
Or are you subconsciously securing future reciprocity for when you eventually get sick? He isn't saying the act of visiting your friend is bad or unhelpful.
Right.
He's saying the motivation is still rooted in the maintenance of your own emotional ecosystem.
So the action can be objectively good, but the internal engine is still just self-preservation.
This is a crucial distinction in understanding his work. He isn't setting out to destroy virtue itself. He isn't saying we should all just become villains.
Okay, that's somewhat of a relief.
Rather, he is exposing what the text calls the counterfeit coins of virtue. By unmasking hypocrisy, he believes he's actually doing true virtue a service.
Because nothing depreciates a sound coinage more than well-executed counterfeits.
Exactly. If everyone is passing off fake money as real, the real currency loses all its value.
That makes the philosophy infinitely more practical for anyone listening right now. He wants us to recognize the fake emotional money we are constantly spending in our social lives.
Yes, and that theory sounds fascinating in the abstract, but let's dissect how self-love actually infiltrates our closest bonds.
Right. Let's apply it to the everyday relationships we all navigate. Think about your networking contacts or your closest friends.
We like to think our friendships are based on deep spiritual resonance.
But La Rochefoucauld suggests we're often just subconsciously choosing friends who validate our specific worldview. Our friends become a mirror for our own ego.
If we look at friendship through his lens, the diagnosis is quite brutal. In Maxim 8:8, he observes that we often persuade ourselves that we love people who are more powerful than we are.
But it's actually interest alone which produces our friendship, right?
Yes. He notes we do not associate with them for any good that we wish to do them, but for the good we hope to derive for ourselves.
How much of that dynamic is actually built on mutual utility or the desire to be validated? It fundamentally changes how we view social mobility. We attach ourselves to people who can elevate us, but we dress it up in the language of admiration.
And he also addresses why these bonds can be so incredibly fragile. In Maxim 82, he says, "The reason we are so changeable in our friendships is that it is difficult to know the qualities of the heart, while it is easy to know those of the head."
Meaning we connect intellectually or based on shared superficial interests very quickly.
Exactly. But the true, deep motivations of the heart remain hidden, often even from ourselves. Because we don't fully understand our own self-love, our bonds are inherently unstable.
And when it comes to daily social interactions, perhaps the sharpest observation is Maxim 3:24. He writes that the extreme pleasure we take in talking about ourselves should make us fear that we are giving no pleasure to our listeners.
It is a devastatingly simple observation about conversational narcissism.
Oh, totally. We've all been trapped at a dinner party with that person.
Right. Our ego is so loud, the desire to project our own importance is so overwhelming that it completely deafens us to the reality of how we are affecting the people in the room with us.
But if we connect this microscopic view of conversation to the bigger picture of how we judge others in society, he remains equally ruthless. We touched on the fear behind justice earlier, but in Maxim 370, he gets very specific about the people administering it.
Ah, yes, the judges.
He says, justice in moderate judges is only love of their own elevation.
They aren't demonstrating moderation and fairness out of inherent wisdom or a love for the law. They are doing it because appearing wise, balanced, and above the fray elevates their personal status in the eyes of society.
So the moderation is just a tool for their own vanity.
Yeah.
It always circles back to the ego.
Which leads directly into the psychological mechanism behind his most famous quote, Maxim 2:18, regarding hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy is the homage which vice renders to virtue.
It's a stunning piece of psychological insight. The paradox he is uncovering here is profound.
Unpack that brilliant paradox for us.
He's pointing out that the very fact that deeply selfish, vice-driven people feel the absolute need to fake being good proves that virtue holds the ultimate power in human society.
Wow. So if goodness didn't have immense social currency, selfish people wouldn't waste their energy pretending to have it.
Precisely. Vice bows down to virtue by putting on its mask. It's an unavoidable acknowledgement that to survive, to get what you want in a functioning community, you have to at least appear to be moral.
Even in our deepest deceptions, we are reinforcing the idea that morality is the standard we're all judged against.
Right.
But taking all of this in, if all our actions are tainted by self-interest and vanity, I mean, in Maxim 209, he outright says, virtue would not travel so far if vanity did not keep her company.
Yeah, that's a harsh one.
Does that make this text a completely depressing, cynical read? Or is there a positive philosophical takeaway? What was the actual historical verdict on what La Rochefoucauld was doing?
Historically, the backlash was significant, precisely because the medicine is so bitter. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the major political philosopher who came later, called the book sad and desolating.
I can see why.
Yet, even as Rousseau criticized the tone, he had to concede the underlying point, admitting that selfishness is indeed the mainspring of human action.
So even his critics couldn't totally deny his logic.
Exactly. And on the other hand, writers like Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels, deeply admired the Maxims. Swift went so far as to write a poem defending the text.
What do you say?
He stated that these sharp observations argue, no corrupted mind in him, the fault is in mankind.
The real discomfort of reading these maxims isn't the fear that he's wrong, it's a bitter pill. The discomfort comes from the creeping realization that he is right.
Definitely.
Because it is incredibly easy to read this text and immediately weaponize it against other people. We read a maxim and think, oh, that perfectly describes my boss, or that is exactly what politicians are doing today.
But using his work to feel superior to others is a complete misreading of the text. If you're using his observations to fuel your own moral outrage against your neighbors, you're just feeding your own self-love all over again.
You're falling right into the trap he is describing. The real challenge is turning that sharp observation inward.
Yes. As one French noblewoman observed at the time, La Rochefoucauld was intensely unpopular in certain circles simply because he told everybody's secret.
We all have a deeply vested interest in maintaining our public appearances.
Right. If we lack actual virtue, we at least assume the posture of it. And human beings are naturally irritated when someone dissipates the delusions that allow us to fake it so comfortably.
The actual utility of the work, then, is not external judgment. The goal is to cure our own self-deceit.
Exactly. He is anatomizing the human heart to show us the perverse subtlety with which our ego glosses over our errors.
We spend so much time and energy disguising our true motives from others that eventually the mask becomes permanent and we completely disguise ourselves to ourselves.
But by understanding the intricate, often hidden mechanisms of our own vanity, we can begin to strive for actual honesty, rather than just performative goodness. His maxims serve as a diagnostic tool for the human mind.
We can actually use that diagnostic tool in our daily lives. The next time you feel a rush of intense moral outrage online, or you feel the sudden urge to do a grand public favor for an acquaintance, you can use La Rochefoucauld to pause.
And ask yourself a very simple, very uncomfortable question. What status am I buying right now?
It forces a necessary pause. Acknowledging that self-interest plays a role in our actions doesn't destroy morality. It simply demands a much higher standard of self-awareness.
It asks us to be brutally honest about our motivations, to actively strip away the counterfeit coins we use to buy social approval, and to recognize the true complexity of why we do what we do.
It's about trading in that fake, easy currency for something real, even if the reality is far less glamorous than the fiction we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
We have journeyed from the treacherous, literal battlefields of the Fronde, through the glittering, deceptive courts of 17th century France, straight into the quiet, sometimes uncomfortable inner workings of your own mind.
The Duke of Rochefoucauld took a bullet to the face to learn about the dark realities of human nature.
But all he is asking us to do is take a hard, unflinching look in the mirror. So we want to leave you with a final scenario to mull over, something to test the waters of your own sea of self-love.
Imagine, from this day forward, every single good deed you ever did was guaranteed to remain an absolute secret.
No one would ever know. You get zero social credit, no boost to your reputation, no tax write-off, and not even a single whispered thank you from the person you helped.
Would you still do it?
Or would your sea of self-love suddenly dry up? Think about it. Until next time.